Sounds good. Alrighty. So I would like to tell you a little bit about what I know about silmethoxin, and then we can go on from there with the questions that I have for you.
Mhm.
Cool. So first synthesized in 1965, filed for patency by Joe Congarza, which was later, it was approved and then later expired. In 2005, Alexander Skulgin proposed that it could be made by introducing 5-MeO-DMT to the substrate of psilocybin mushrooms. And then the Church of Silmethoxin used this theory to, well, proved this theory in creating oral 5-MeO, which has a longer half time, as I've learned, than vaporized MEO, which can add a lot of benefits. Um, that's, I guess, some of the basics that I've come to in my research, but I would love to know if you have anything else to add about kind of the development of silmethoxin.
No, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Obviously, all this was really, well, the actual molecule, of course, first synthesized and patented back in the 60s, but the concept of mixing synthetic tryptamines with mushroom substrates was done in the 80s with DET and one other synthetic tryptamine. Some scientists over there had added that to mushroom substrates, were able to 4-hydroxylate it consistently through introducing it to the mushroom substrate. So yeah, so that's when Alexander Shulgin drew upon his knowledge of that, thinking about cylomethoxin and the 4-hydroxylated aspect of it, saying, basically 50-50 odds that if you were to do this with 5-MeO-DMT, that it would produce cylomethoxin. So yeah, no, you got it pretty correct. Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
cool. Very cool. It's definitely a
And
fun.
I'll say this is that there's, we're, as a church, we're exploring alternative methods of working with nature to produce cylomethoxin in much more magical alchemical ways, which produce, pure cylomethoxin, I guess I would say, outside of, obviously mushrooms are in a fruiting body with other, types of alkaloids and just natural things that come in the mushroom substrate. But we're working on other processes to work hand in hand with nature to produce just the pure cylomethoxin itself. So this is a constantly evolving process, both scientific and religious in nature.
Very interesting. So how have you guys come to, or how are you guys attempting to refine that process, if you can share that?
Working with some real wizards. Some
Yeah.
real wizards, man. Yeah, we just through our journey, spirit sends us the people, and they're like, hey, I got this knowledge about this, and we bring them together, and yeah, it's just it's natural. And I mean, I guess a lot of it's kind of geared, in a sense, borrowing some ideas or concepts from what other scientific and spiritual branches are doing, and just kind of bringing all that together under one roof, in order to, yeah, just further, it's really just a further exploration of how can humans work in conjunction with nature to create these mystical, sacred sacraments without having to go through some kind of long drawn out, purely natural process or purely scientific chemical process, right? We're looking for this middle ground in between where we can work together and make this more efficient for all parties involved.
Right, right. I see that.
Yeah.
Um, so I would love to hear, I guess, about your first experience using the sacrament, if you're open to sharing it.
Yeah, it was a very surreal experience. Probably about a year earlier, I had a very deep ayahuasca experience where I was, speaking with my spirit guide that, told me, because I said, why is humanity in such a pickle, with each other, and especially really my question was really directed why towards Mother Nature. Why are we destroying Mother Nature? How did this come to be? Obviously we know in the distant past we lived in harmony with Mother Nature. So how did this, discordant state of affairs arise? And the answer was simple. It was said that, well, back probably in and around the years 1000 to 1300, particularly when St. Thomas Aquinas began to split his writings into scientific and then matters of faith and spirit. And so it started this dichotomous branching of the study of sciences versus the study of spirit and the metaphysical, right? Well, what ended up happening? Well, science and medicine got together and started coming up with all these great cures and substances that were made and stuff like that. So humans stopped looking to nature to heal them for support, right? So that completely redefined our relationship with nature. We no longer felt like we needed nature to keep us alive, to help us survive, right? You know, man and science can do that, right? We don't need nature. So that really, you know, defined for us the course of events from there to now. And it seems that we've just gone further in a divide, right? We run over nature to build houses. You know, we don't need it. You know, my doctor up the road can write me a prescription at the pharmacy. Ain't got nothing to do with this here, and I'm going to be okay. So that kind of is what was relayed to me. And so the first time I ever picked up, you know, a mushroom, the sacrament, it was immediately, I was immediately taken back to that experience. And then I soon became to realize that, oh, this is a physical manifestation of a reunion back between science and medicine, nature and spirit. And so the first time I even touched it was an extremely deep and profound experience for me before I ever even consumed it. The first time I consumed it, yeah, it was great. I mean, I didn't take just a large dose, but I could tell immediately that this had a very distinguished, separate, apart, distinct character and effect to it than psilocybin mushrooms did. So I knew from the first time. Well, we all did. The first time we ever took it, we knew that. Oh yeah, this is an A1 receptor modulator. This is a orally available weak form of 5-MeO-DMT. You know, everyone you know that's been doing, you know, 5-MeO-DMT, psilocybin for 20 plus years will tell you. You know, this is more of an A1 5-MeO type modulation that's occurring. And I mean, it's just flipping open your switch to source. You know, at a very just slight degree, it's opening your brain up and your senses to feel that divine, loving source energy to channel through your body, to calm your egoic thoughts, to keep you very heart centered. Yeah, I noticed that the first time when I took it, and I said, this is incredible. You know, and a little on the scientific, you know, not that I would go say this to the world or whatever, but in my mind, my personal opinion is I thought, this is what an anti-anxiety or an anti-depression medication should be doing for people. Right? I knew that the first time I took it. Not that I'm making that claim that this is better or blah, blah. It's just my personal opinion when I think about, you know, times that I've gone through depression or times that I've gone through anxiety. I knew the first time I consumed the sacrament that like this would have helped me more than any medication that I had ever taken for those two particular issues, which I mean, ultimately, in my view, and the church's view, is that it's all spiritual in nature anyway. So obviously, something that's spiritual and comes from nature is obviously going to help with that, right? Because everything manifests originally on the spiritual plane, right? Because spirit manifests throughout all of creation, all planes of existence, right? So of course, something that is addressing you spiritually is going to manifest benefits on both the mental and physical planes.
Of course, of course. Yeah, so I'm curious then how you personally see how you would compare the therapeutic benefits of cilomethoxin to the therapeutic benefits of psilocybin or DMT on their own.
Well, I'll speak on it with the caveat that I'm not a medical professional. You know, again, like we spoke earlier, like I did come into this space when I wrote my first book, you know, really deep in the research, you know, as far as like psilocybin's effectiveness for all these conditions, right? And I have periodically kept up with it, but really my journey has really gone way, way far into the spiritual, but I still am in touch with that. So, I mean, and this is just, look, what I'm about to say is just from my personal experience, what I believe based upon my personal experiences with either of these sacraments. And it's just, you know, I feel like for deep trauma releases, when you really need to like go back and face something head on to let that energetic roadblock be released, I think psilocybin, a flood dose of psilocybin in a very safe and secure setting would probably be the best for that. But once you kind of get over those deep traumatic humps, I think the cyclomethoxam is just a great periodic reminder of that that energetic connection to source. I don't think that I've never heard reports of cyclomethoxam like taking people back through their childhood trauma and exploring all those deep issues, and maybe it could for some people. I mean, it's just not something I've heard yet. So I think that psilocybin is probably better at dealing with those, real deep down, stuff down things. Whereas I think the cyclomethoxam is just good for like daily spiritual, self-care practices.
I hear you.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the sensory experience of cyclomethoxam, are there any sensory themes that would mirror or set it apart from the psilocybin experience or the DMT experience that you can know, at least in your personal experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, so obviously DMT, psilocybin are all A2 modulators, right? That create this really intense visionary experience. Usually comes with some type of body load, that people handle good or bad, just depending on, really the individual. Whereas, yeah, with the A1, it's kind of like when you do 5-MeO DMT, there's no crazy visuals. It's a bright white light, you know what I mean? That you're like, oh man, this place is very familiar. I've been here before, but there's no crazy, some people might have some sacred geometrical visions and stuff, nothing super colorful or things like that, but super sacred. And so, yeah, the cyclomethoxam is the same way. I mean, for me, for sure, I've never really had any note of any visuals on it, even at higher doses. For me, it's a completely, internal, energetic experience in that. Yeah, it's just, again, for me, completely energetic. I've never got any hint of any visuals working with it. Some people have, not everybody said this is not anywhere near psilocybin, but some people get some type of visual action going on, but it's nothing in the neighborhood or ballpark of what you would experience with DMT or psilocybin. So yeah, I would say, internal feeling energetics, cyclomethoxam. More external visionary type of experience would be psilocybin DMT. And again, both of those are very profound and have their, like I say, I mean, those of us who've been practicing with these sacraments for a long time can tell you, what are you experiencing? Why are you coming to this site to work with entheogens? And you could probably nail down, based upon the differences between these experiences that we all know, what would best serve somebody. And I see, doctors, and also see, religious clerics of the future being experts in that, in discerning those types of things, of saying, okay, where are you at? What have you experienced? Why are you here? And being able to work out a plan for people to work with one or multiple sacraments in some order, specifically designed to help them progress in the most fastest and efficient way possible, I guess I'd say.
Yeah. I think that ties it very well. I like that comparison, kind of the visual aspect of psilocybin not being present in cyclomethoxam. That's very interesting. So, what would you say about the length of a cyclomethoxam journey? Are there any unique qualities about the timeline or the curve of the experience?
That's a very so yeah. So I'll speak first about cyclomethoxam timeline in relation to a 5-MeO DMT timeline, right? So 5-MeO DMT inhaled, that's the most common method. I think we could agree on that people working with 5-MeO inhale it. Obviously, it's a huge rocket ship up, all the way to what I would consider source consciousness, and then down in 20 minutes peak experience and back. And then there's this afterglow period, which a lot of people compare to the feeling of cyclomethoxam, where it's like you've already gone through the extended, the deep journey, but then there's like this lingering effects that might linger for 20-30 minutes post that peak experience. as it relates to psilocybin, it's, my personal experience has been that silomethoxin lasts much longer than psilocybin for me, especially at the microdose. But everyone else, I guess I'm the odd duck out. Everybody else kind of thinks that it's either, you know, equivalent in time or even maybe a little bit less. So yeah, but I mean, it just goes to underscore that like these sacraments affect people differently based on probably so many factors that we couldn't even surmise what those are. So yeah, it's hard to give a definite answer on that, but I think for the majority of people, the consensus is that it's either right around the same time as psilocybin, or maybe.
Oh, sorry about that
Oh, it's
background.
okay.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's good to understand because online I was seeing a good amount of variation. So it's
Yeah,
helpful to know that that variation also exists within your community and your members.
yeah. For me, it seems like when I eat, almost, if I eat simultaneously or slightly before I take it, it seems to last longer for me. So I guess it might have something to do with, and that has been proposed too, is that it has to do with gut health. Has a lot to do with how it affects you.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, that's when we get questions submitted from clients or readers about how long a psychedelic experience lasts with whatever medicine. There's so many variables to it, and uh,
Yeah,
it
there
really
are.
does affect
There's
everyone.
there's some underground practitioners in this country doing very interesting work with intramuscular injections,
Mhm.
particularly with MDMA, MDA. Like it, yeah, it affects the timeline. It's shorter, but it's the method of coming up, coming down. So yeah, I think in the future exploring, once we kind of isolate pure compounds and stuff, working with possibly other methods of administration will be explored as we move forward, I guess I would say. So yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, so I guess on that note, considering the rising, Western interest in psychedelic medicine, what does silomethoxin represent for you, and the church in this landscape that's changing so quickly?
Oh yeah, so I'll say this is, we're a church, so even though we acknowledge science, we work with scientists, we work with medical professionals, like we're not trying to interject or insert ourselves into the medical model completely, if that makes sense. So like we're not trying to compete with some of these other big pharmaceutical companies that are trying to get all these patents on everything and all that. Like they're not even within our purview. We're just doing our church, people who feel called come, and I think it will grow. And to be honest, I think eventually the medical establishment might pick up on it. But it's one of those things that like it can't be patented. And that's the sad thing about this country is it doesn't matter how beneficial or effective. And just look at the Controlled Substances Act. That's all you need to know. Look at it. I mean, when you look at Schedule 1, what's one of the main components or main characteristics of all those substances? One, it can't be patented, it can't be monetized, and it can't be marketed and sold with a huge profit, right? That's probably the common thing among them. Safety has absolutely, or effectiveness has absolutely zero to do with substances being on Schedule 1, right? So that's kind of the same with silomethoxin, is that it can be patented, monetized to the 50th degree or whatever. So I don't, I say that possibly the medical establishment might pick it up and work with it one day, but I don't know if there's enough money involved for them to do that, no matter how beneficial that it is for people.
Right, right. I completely understand that. It's definitely something that as this, medical model for psychedelics continues to evolve, well, we already see it happening. A lot of medications, medicines, natural medicines trying to
Mm-hmm.
get patented, changed, and not, honored for what it can do on a soul level, on a
Yeah, and here's one thing is I think is, you know, I see it. Yeah, I'm sure you see it too. There's so much competition, and to a certain degree, I feel because we've had statements directed at us as a church from a lot of these scientific medical people and organizations that like for some reason they feel threatened by us, right? When we're not interjecting ourselves any one bit in whatever market they're trying to monopolize or control. I think what they're missing is that there is going to be enough, I say business, but there's going to be enough people interested seeking these things that like there's probably not going to be enough companies, people available to serve all those people. You
Mhm.
know, I don't, and it's really so, you know, I do a lot of work with entheogenic churches, right? And I mean, I've had worked with over 60 projects in the last 3 years. And trust me, there's not a person that I've worked with that doesn't have a waiting list for people to come and sit in ceremony with them, right? And it's just growing exponentially by the day. I mean, you know, I've had a very unique seat to watch this thing grow over the last 3 years. And I just tell you, it's like every day I'm just completely blown away by like how it's growing and like, and that's beyond just the church space, you know, like even, and people might love it or hate it, but like Aaron Rodgers coming out about drinking ayahuasca and like all these things, it's like every day there's something else happening that just is furthering this whole movement and you know push towards these types of you know either treatments or ceremonies, you know whichever one you want to term it. And yeah, so yeah, I think it's growing incredibly fast, and you know in that I just think that people you know who come into this with some type of like competitive mindset like is really missing the point and are really living in a lack you know mindset. I don't think that there's any need in this space, whichever sector you're in, to get super competitive with other people. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I completely agree. And I'd say, this is something that we have seen at Psychedelic Passage, just
Yeah.
the exponential rise in interest by people who want to try these medicines. They either saw it on a show on Netflix, started
Yeah.
watching YouTube videos about it, saw it on the news. It's really gaining a lot of attention. And I'll say that even not so much in the um, business side of it, but in the personal use side of psychedelic medicine, because it is becoming so mainstream and there are people publishing, trip reports and what to expect and all of that. There's also comparison within the individual psychedelic experience
Yes.
of what it should look like, or strictly interpreting psychedelics for medical use and therapeutic use, but trying to separate the spiritual side of it.
Yeah, yeah, which we talked about earlier. And so yeah, you know, here's, you know, and I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about this for several years, but to me it's like, you know, like we were saying before when we started, you know, even the, you know, you go ask the researchers at Johns Hopkins, what are they going to tell you? What's going to tell you what their statistics are showing that even in a clinical setting, 70 to 80% of people who are working with high dose psilocybin experiences are having what's coined primary religious mystical experience. And just so you know, what constitutes a primary religious mystical experience, that definition has more or less been set since I think 1901 when William James published his, you know, varieties of religious experiences. So we're not, you know, we have a pretty set definition. Obviously it's subjective what people report, but otherwise we have a very objective set definition of what constitutes a primary religious mystical experience. But beyond that, I think, you know, yeah, people are coming to it because what else are they saying? That these experiences are one of the top 5 most meaningful experiences of people's lives. So it's like, wow, you know, you're reading this that like these depression scores are going way down. These experiences are more meaningful to some people than watching their child's birth. You know, of course, people are being drawn to it. I mean, can you blame them? And then it's like people have these experiences. You know, I heard the other day, I heard Rick Doblin down at Canadelic in Miami. He basically, and this is what he said that anyone who claims that they're using entheogens or psychedelics religiously, that they're bogus, that these are fraudulent claims. There's no way. But that it is crazy because the head of this big psychedelic science organization is making claims that are contrary to science. So again, what does the science say? Well, it says pretty reliably people are having religious experiences, right? So when people have those experiences and then go, this is going to be my primary way to communicate with my, you know, definition or the divine as it means to me. I don't think that's bogus. I think it's actually very real. And I think that the scientific evidence would actually bolster those assertions. And I think, trying to prejudge anyone's sincerity in that regard is not, again, it's not in line with the science, and it's not really consistent with the way the law judges those things.
Right, right,
Mhm.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that. So then, in terms of, I know that you're not so much in the medical scientific side of it, but have you, is there a way that you have found is helpful to accurately determine a microdose or macrodose dosage wise?
But then, no, that's a very good question. And look, I think getting dosages correct and accurate and knowing and understanding those is still a very essential part of the religious spiritual practice, right? Because under the law, we have to still be safe, right, in order to receive protection under the religious exercise laws, right? So I do think that even though this is somewhat scientific in nature, I do think that knowledge of and practicing good practices as far as what the science is telling us, because that's one thing good about science is it will give us some safety data that spiritual religious practitioners might not otherwise have, and I'll always encourage them to use it. On the microdose thing, it's just, man, people are all over the map, to be honest with you. I mean, I think with silomethoxam, we've zeroed it in somewhere between 75 to 150 milligrams of the dried mushroom fruiting body seems to be an effective microdose, in the sense that people still get the sense that energetic sensation, but that it's not in any sense overwhelming or inebriating or preventing them from doing anything they otherwise would have been doing that day. But then, it's like with psilocybin, alkaloid contents are way varied. I've had 1 gram of certain psilocybin mushrooms I've been bred for potency that were stronger than 3 to 5 grams of some other ones that are, I guess you would say, normal potency. And so, I would encourage people, like, if you're microdosing, know your source. I mean, that's what I'll say about anything. Know your source, ask as many questions as you can. Obviously, not everyone's getting every batch that they grow tested. I'm not suggesting that everybody should, but at least ask if they have any indication on what the average alkaloid content might be. And then, yeah, what I would suggest is go to Google, and just, there's so much information out there on Google that I'm sure you could type in, hey, what's a good microdose for psilocybin mushrooms with a 3.5% alkaloid content? And you could probably get tons of information that could help guide someone, in that regard.
Yeah, yeah. So then I'm curious because this is something that we've noticed within our clients. Typically, the older a client is, not always, but in a lot of cases, the higher the dosage they have to take.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Specifically, I'm sure because we think that it has a lot to do with the person's rigidity of ego and their sense of control, which normally people who are older tend to have more structures in place. They tend to have been
Yes.
conditioned for longer, so they usually need a larger dose. Is this what you found with silomethoxin?
Oh, I've never really examined it along those lines, but I will say this is that I agree with your assessment of why that is. And I would add that, here's one thing that I've noticed that might help also shed some light on this is that, like with silomethoxam, I've noticed that people who have done previous work with entheogens and who have done a consistent spiritual practice need way less than people who don't. And I think what it is that, as we grow older and we age and we go through all these life events, trauma manifests in our aura as, energetic blockages and barriers. And someone who's worked those out, it takes a less dose to get that sacred energy flowing through them sufficiently for them to open up and have a mystical spiritual experience. Whereas older people who are just starting out probably have a ton of blockages and probably have a lot of resistance. Like you say, these mind programs have a lot of resistance to the experience, right? And so they probably will need that larger dose to kind of overcome that resistance sufficiently for them to then release into the experience.
Right, right. Yeah, that all seems very similar
Yeah.
to what we're seeing.
Yeah, just my opinion on it, anyways.
Alrighty. So I'm gonna follow up with my next question. I was seeing online that people reported they had less of a tolerance to built against cilomethoxin. Is
Yeah.
that something that you've noticed as well?
Yeah, that's something that we noticed immediately. My law partner and co-founder Ian was part of the first. I wasn't. I was living in Louisiana at the time. They were in actually Mexico the first time that they consumed this. But they did a dieta, meaning that for every day for like 5 days, they worked strictly with the cylomethoxin. And one of the first thing they noticed, they're like, I woke up and take the same dose I did yesterday and feel substantially or similar the same effects. And so obviously that was another initial clue for us that this is something markedly different than psilocybin and more along the lines of an A1 modulator, because A1 modulators don't build tolerance like the A2 ones do. And so yeah, so that is a thing that, I mean, again, I'll try to speak from personal experience as much as I can, but most definitely my personal experience has been the same thing when I do microdosing regimens.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's, obviously we're dealing with the dried mushroom fruiting body. So again, like always, there's some alkaloid variance in there. Maybe there's 25 more milligrams in this one capsule, another one. So, accounting for natural variations like that, still get the same or substantially similar effects from the same or substantially similar dose day after day.
Wow, okay, I see. And
Which, like, as you're aware, psilocybin, like I said, the A2s, like, usually I think there's like a 2 or 3 day skip on a microdosing regimen just for like to help fight against the tolerance buildup.
right.
Mhm.
So, and then are you finding that because of this lack of tolerance buildup, people are, or you, the community, people who use silomethoxin are microdosing more continuously without less breaks in between?
Yeah, I mean, I would assume so. I mean, for me, for sure. And to be honest with you, Erica, like I was never a big microdoser until silomethoxin. And I think it's just because it's very functional for me, and like the benefits and the effects for me are just
Oh, it looks like you've frozen. Um, are you there?
extremely spiritual in nature. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, you had frozen for a
Oh,
second.
okay, so I
But
said my internet connection. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I would imagine, and again, unfortunately, I don't have as much time as I would like to like be online on the forums and stuff like that, communicating with people. But my guess is that yeah, people are probably doing, multiple days in a row or doing like 2 weeks on, taking a week off. Some people might be working with it every day. That's the beautiful thing about it is, we can, use it as needed, whatever that may be. I don't know what anyone's specific circumstances are, but if the silomethoxin works and they need it multiple days in a row, by all means.
right, right. Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Um, so then as community members are, moving through their own silomethoxin journey, I'd love to know if and what kind of support the Church of Silomethoxin offers in preparation and then also afterwards, after they've had their ceremony.
Yeah, so we right now we're working and we just launched a ceremony facilitator program. So, outside of people doing their own personal ceremonies, which is perfectly fine, and maybe members gather for a ceremony. We have our biweekly integration after our Sunday service. We've just launched a veterans integration every Wednesday. We have an event next month on the 15th, and as soon as that's done, we're going to start, implementing more integration into it. But I will say that our biweekly after Sunday service integration groups are powerful. People sharing experiences and really just people coming together to further their understanding of the sacrament, its effects, the spiritual processes and things involved with it. But yeah, I mean, people, and I will say this, we do have an emergency integration or spiritual crisis hotline that has actually been used a couple times by our members. Our integration specialist Hope runs it. So we do have a constant line for people. We have a Discord server on the back end of our website where members and some of our leadership are in constant contact with one another. So, you know, should anybody have any need for support or have questions, you know, we do have a very safe space on the back end of our website for members who have questions or need guidance.
That's very cool. That's very cool. I really like that hotline part of it. It reminds me of the Fireside Project, but I haven't
Yeah,
heard something similar to it. And this
yeah,
reminds
it's like I say, we implemented it maybe a month or two ago, and yeah, there's been one or two people who, you know, were going through a spiritual crisis that we were able to provide direct and effective assistance. And it makes me feel good. You know, I'm glad that we're able to provide that for people because, you know, you just never know what people are going through. And sometimes people, I've been there in my life where like, yeah, I need some help, you know, and yeah, it feels good. And I'm glad. And I hope that we can expand those types of offerings as we grow.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful.
But I'll
Um,
say this real quick is that, yeah, I agree. You know, preparation and integration are perhaps the most important parts of this whole process. And I always like to quote the Huichol, you know, the Huichol peyote tradition in Mexico. Had the opportunity to speak with some of their elders before, and they were like, yeah, you know, yeah, we sit in ceremony like two days a year, but really our whole life is a ceremony because every day they're making sacrifices and putting energy and offerings into that ceremony because, you know, according to them, the more energy you put pre-ceremony, the clearer and deeper that your answers will be. So I think that preparing people for these experiences, having them do as much as they can handle that's possible as far as putting energy into the preparation for that experience is only going to greatly benefit the quality of responses and answers that they receive through the experience. It's like you know, it's like the sacrament will only meet you as far as you meet it, right? So it's like, and to be honest, there's a lot of churches I've dealt with that they won't let someone else pay for your ceremony, you know, because they've learned in the past that when other people pay for other people's ceremonies, those people don't take it as seriously. They don't have as beautiful of an experience as they should be having. And so, yeah, so it's a common thing about, you know, especially on the preparation, like make those people put some energy and thought and effort into showing up in their fullest form that day.
right, right. I completely agree with that. We have, similar situations where maybe it's a parent coming in for their child to figure out if their child who is maybe struggling with depression or anxiety, whatever the case is, is eligible for this type of program. But then we meet with their child, with their family member, with their friend, and they themselves are not personally committed to the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just like you said, what you put in is what you get out. That's
Yeah, and that's with anything in life. I think it really shines through here. And you know, even through my journey, you know, back when I first did my first sacred mushroom grow, I'll never forget my experience with that sacrament was completely different than all the other ones I'd ever had. It was just so much deeper and more profound. And you know, now looking back, it's because I put my love and energy into growing them, right? And so they matched me where I was with them, you know, and that's why those experiences were the way they were, at least just my view on it.
right, right, right. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. I was curious now more on the logistics end of it. Your site states that all members go through an application process to become approved. What, if you can share, what does that approval process look like? Is there any, criteria that has to be met in order to receive?
Well, yeah, so obviously, you know, we discourage anyone, safety's obviously first. So anyone who might be on any, and typically we suggest following Dr. Ben Malcolm, the spirit pharmacist, has a, you know, contraindication list for 5-MeO DMT. So we encourage everyone to thoroughly read that and understand that, and that if they have any contradictions, listed there that they should probably seek the advice of a doctor, before going. But otherwise, our application process is really just gauging whether people are sincere in their desire to work with the sacrament on a spiritual religious level. And look, not saying that has to be exclusively it, because the beautiful thing about this, well, the one beautiful thing about our law is that the law recognizes that people are going to have religious, spiritual, and secular beliefs that often overlap, right? And what the law says clearly is that just because your secular beliefs overlap with your religious or spiritual beliefs doesn't detract the weight that should be accorded your spiritual religious beliefs. So it's like in this instance, it's like, yeah, I'm good with working with these on a spiritual religious level, but I'm also doing it because I think it's going to help my depression or my anxiety or things like this. So like thinking that there's secular medical benefits and aspects of it doesn't detract from you saying, yeah, I agree with, the spiritual religious use of these types of entheogens. So it's really proven for that. We prefer to have people who are referred by a number member. It's not required, but it's easier for me to approve people if they have been. And then, we like to gauge people's experience with other, entheogens in the past, or if they've somehow taken citalopram before, free to put that too. But that's really the biggest thing. I like to look at people's past experiences and kind of where they're at on that journey. And yeah, there's just some people that, I do deny some people sometimes, but it's just, I don't know if they're ready to really work effectively with the sacrament. But that's not to say that's always there. And then sometimes people just don't put enough information for me to make a call one way or the other. So I have to deny those. But yeah, it's really just advising about the safety, and then probing as to sincerity and prior experience working with these types of sacraments.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for that. So then I know that there's currently no clinical studies on the effects of silomethoxin, but your church has stated that it's assisting in the medical and scientific
Yeah.
in studying the effects of the sacrament. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'd just love to hear a little bit about the studies that you guys have conducted.
Oh yeah, so yeah, everything to date has been anecdotal. Now we're on the brink of publishing a research application in conjunction with Quantified Citizen out of Canada, who did the Paul Stamets microdose study. So they had already coded some app technology for these things, right? And so we're in the very final. Unfortunately, one of the investigators passed away. I hate to announce that here, but yeah, one of the investigators passed away during the process of working up the app. And so that kind of set us back a month. But I'm hoping within the next 30 to 45 days that we'll be publishing this app. And then we have a very prestigious, university here in the United States who's filed with their IRB to participate in these observational studies. But yeah, it will be, it'll be probably close to other stock standard questionnaires for these types of experiences and stuff like that. We're not getting too involved on that end of it. We're letting the professionals, make those calls on what will be asked and what all we'll be probing for, stuff like that. And I trust absolutely in their discretion. But yeah, we're going to be, gauging basically the exact same stuff that clinical trials would be gauging. Obviously it's only observational in nature, but our hope is that once we master these other methods of producing silomethoxin, that we can then bring it to GMP, and then we'll be able to actually engage in, for real clinical trials. Not that this isn't valid or good data; it's going to be great. And hopefully that will also motivate people once we get that GMP done to want to further take that out further as far as trials are concerned. But yeah, we're definitely motivated in that direction. We've been working very hard. We've purchased a lease for the app technology. So yeah, it's just a matter of getting it the last little bit spun up and published to our membership. And yeah, it'll be exciting to see how that pans out.
Very cool, very cool. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Very exciting for you guys. I'm definitely gonna stay updated on that.
Yeah, we will. And as papers are published and stuff like that, we'll most definitely, I'll let you know. If you want to come back and talk to me about it, I'll be glad, or speak with one of our investigators about it. I'll be glad to connect y'all.
Very cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
So then when you guys were in creating this oral 5-MeO that you have right now, was there any metabolite profiling research that was conducted?
Yeah, so we've conducted, so yeah, and on the testing, and so we just hired our director of sacred sciences, which is an I say a former uh, pharmaceutical industry chemist who is an expert in testing and bringing certain substances to GMP and stuff like that. And so, our position has always been is that there is no reference sample for silomethoxin. So even though that they synthesized it back in the 60s and stuff, I don't even know if technology existed back then to even create a reference sample or not. So there's no reference sample. So, and then our second position is that to date, only GCMS has been done, which is a very destructive testing process, right? So you're essentially shooting photons at light speed, I think, like into this. And so so we do alkaloid profiles. Well, what do we see? We see trace to no amounts of psilocybin, trace to no amounts of psilocin, and all the other alkaloids that are usually present completely eliminated, right? So it's like, you're like, oh, okay, you take it, you feel it, and then you look at the alkaloid profile, you're like, well, adding two and two together, right? Our position is that this is actually silomethoxin that we're experiencing. But I'll tell you one interesting thing we found out is that the psilocybin mushrooms, they like to, once you start adding 5-MeO to the substrate, even adding a little bit will completely eliminate all the other alkaloids. But on the psilocybin psilocin, it actually starts to reduce the psilocin first, and then you add more and it starts to reduce the psilocybin. And we all know that that has to do with the genetic amino acid chains within the mushroom itself. That's kind of, I guess, the order that it produces these things. But yeah, so we were able to, when you're growing mushrooms, there's thousands of variables, right? But we've been working with very, expert mushroom growers who are able to, over time work, take notes, look at these test results, and then figure out all the variables to consistently get those alkaloid profiles to the minimum. So that's been the depth of our testing and research and stuff like that. But we're hoping through this new process to be able to produce a pure actual sample of the molecule itself, the silomethoxin, which we can then use to make a solid reference sample, right? And then we can use that moving forward once we bring it up to GMP and stuff like that. So yeah, that's our next phase.
Very cool. Very cool. That'll be really exciting, because that's kind of a point where a lot of people on the online are trying to
Yeah.
get research on. So that's
Yeah,
gonna be very cool.
it's crazy because there's a lot of spiritual aspects to this, right? Because a lot of people are very stuck in the purely scientific paradigm,
Mhm.
where if science doesn't tell me it's true, it's not true, right? But you can go ask the scientists and testers today and say, well, can you disprove that silomethoxin's in there? No.
Mm.
See what I mean? And so, I think, to be honest with you, I think everything's in divine timing and order and sequence. I think we are eventually here in the fairly near future going to be able to get, that solid reference sample and all that stuff. But I think this period of time is meant for people who have put 100% of their faith in science to take a step back and say, because you got to imagine, okay, you've worked with psilocybin, 5-MeO, all that stuff for years, and you take this what's alleged to be silomethoxin, and you say, wow, this is incredible, way different than anything that I've ever tried. But then the scientists tell you, oh, well, there's no testing that is actually in there. So then now you start doubting your own personal experience, right? Because some scientist who's never taken it, done no shit about it, is telling you it's not in there, right? So I think for a lot of people, this is a spiritual exercise in trusting our own personal experiences with things over where, science or some other person, third party, starts to shed doubt on it. And not saying that every time that occurs that the person's personal experience is 100% correct. I mean, I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but I think people need to learn to put more stock in their personal experiences over purely what science, this materialistic realm, is saying, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I I completely understand where you're coming from. I'll say that with all of research studies that are coming out about the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics, people are a lot of them are leaning on the research, which is, very understandable. They're leaning on the research to understand how these medicines act, but there is always so much variance,
Yes.
in
Yeah.
how any experience unfolds. And there is, like you said, there's that level of trust that you have to having your own personal experience.
Mhm.
Um, mhm,
And I tell people this all the time. It's like, I've been to tons of ayahuasca ceremonies.
mhm.
And not one time I've been like, oh, did you test this? What's the DMT content? I need to know the exact content, that way I can measure it volumetrically, exactly what, blah, blah, blah. Nobody does that. No, they go up there, they drink it, and they have their experience. And guess what? They're confident DMT was in it because of the experience that they had, right? But they're not like upfront, like, blah, blah, blah. And our position as a church has always been this. Look, if the testing and scientific exact dosing and all that's important, then this probably is not the place for you. As a church or religious organization, as of now, where the science stands with solid methoxy, it takes a little bit of faith, right? It takes a little bit of faith. And I mean, a religious scholar would argue that real, true transubstantiation with a sacrament requires an element of faith. But, another thing is that, when we look at other religions, okay, that serve sacraments that claim that it's the blood and bread of Christ. Nobody's not once been like, oh, you can't prove that, so you need to stop serving bread and wine, right? Because you can't prove that it's the blood and flesh of Jesus Christ. And that's not saying anything bad about that. It's just making a comparison, with people like coming in at us. There's other examples of this in religion and spirituality. That's a perfect and normally healthy part of it.
Yeah, yeah. I think a very cool example of, not very cool example, but an important example of kind of this contradiction in, I see that a big source of it is just the contradiction in how we name things, the differences in how we name things, science versus spirituality. To me, science proves a lot of spirituality and spirituality
Yes,
proves a lot of science.
it
But
does.
then it can, with specifically psychedelics, to a lot of people, their experiences come down to a, spiritual emergency, which in scientific terms could be interpreted as psychosis or misinterpreted as
Yeah,
psychosis.
I agree.
Um, so
Wholeheartedly.
there's so much nuance in this space.
Yeah, no, there is. And when I look at the Great Pyramids,
Mhm,
you're like, damn, how the hell did they build that? But you know, we know this. We know, like with the Hermeticists, the ancient scholars, they never separated matters of faith and spirit from science or man. They studied the universe. That's why colleges are called universities, because in ancient times everything was studied together under one rubric.
mhm.
And you look at what they were able to accomplish, right? And so, part of what our church is trying to do is kind of bring, at least to a certain degree, these two camps back together. And, I see this testing scientific thing as just kind of like a growing pain of having to come together. Just something that's going to have to be worked through. But I firmly believe that scientifically, we're going to be able to produce the pure substance, because doing the synthesis is like a 12-step process. I think Hamilton Morris said it would take over a month. We priced it. It's going to be like 75K just to be able to synthesize a reference sample, right? And then, if that's the path you want to go and produce solid methoxy around that route, I mean, 75K is nothing that it's going to cost you to consistently do that process. So that's why we went back to the drawing board and said, are there other more efficient ways that we can still work hand in hand with nature, not having to go through the mushroom route in order to produce this compound efficiently, pure product type thing. And so that's where we're now focusing our efforts. And we're hoping, within the next 6 months to have some results there that, we'll obviously share with everyone. And I think, again, that'll be more to help solidify back the medicine and science and religious spiritual communities.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I'm very
Yeah,
excited for all
yeah,
of this. This
yeah.
is, um, the developments in every sector of psychedelic medicine, but specifically what I'm reading and learning about celemethoxin is going to be very, very interesting to learn about.
Yeah,
So
well, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's incredible. And, I'll admit that, like, early on when we were able through GCMS testing to like positively prove that solid was in there, I went through a spiritual thing about it, right? But eventually I had to say, Greg, like, I've been working with these sacraments for over 15 years, and I've taken sacred mushrooms over 100 times. Haven't done 5-MeO quite near as much as that per se, but I've had a little taste of both. And like my personal experience was telling me that, like, that really truly I do believe it is, right? Because when we look at the structure of the molecule and what its probable effects are, that was in alignment for me. So I finally had to say, is like, look, like, everything's in divine timing and order and sequence, and probably there is a more overarching metaphysical, reasoning behind this sequence of how the science and testing is working out. So yeah, I mean, admittedly, I've also had to do this spiritual, went through some spiritual turmoil between, purely science or spirit, and so yeah, and look, I feel like I've greatly benefited from going through that process, right? So I'm very grateful for it. And, I'm sure that there's other people in our church that have gone or are going through it too. But, hopefully at the end of the day, we'll be able to just show that we were all correct,
yeah,
which would be the best thing if that's the way it turns out.
yeah. I think the two sides of the same coin, two
That's right.
different dimensions of the same plane.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that you have to go soon. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, I got a meeting. I'm 2 minutes late, but
My apologies. Is there
that's
anything else that you'd like to add to this piece that we haven't quite covered
okay.
yet?
No, I think we about covered. I mean, nothing I can think of off the top of my head. You asked some really good questions, and we covered a wide array of territory. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the article.
Yeah, of course. I'll send it to you as soon as it's complete.
Cool, cool. Yeah, please do.
Thank you so much for your time, Greg.
Yeah, Erica, thank you. And again, if you have any other need for some content, just reach out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cool.
Take care.
Thank you, Erica.
Bye. It was nice meeting you.
You too.